Hey everyone, it's Leanne. Welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today I'm making these really fun fairy cards, and this is a thank you card that my niece is going to give to her cheer coaches for their end of the season. So I need to make a few of these cards. So to begin, I have a top folded card. I'm going to do a horizontal format, but top folded, and I have 4 that I'm going to make. And I'm going to use this Cape Cod paper I picked up from Michael's. I really like this blue on the end. It matches their blue from their team colors. And then I'm going to use the rectangle scallop borders from Fawn. And I pulled out my grassy meadow borders, but I actually end up using ocean wave borders, and I'll show you that later in the video and how I use those. And this is the Fairy Friends stamp set from Fawn and the coordinating dies as well. And I'm going to use some Distress Oxide inks in Worn Lipstick and Wilted Violet. I have Memento Tuxedo Black ink for stamping. I'm going to use Versamark ink as well because I want to do some embossing with some white embossing powder. And I have my circle blenders to do my background blending with those Distress Oxide inks. And I've never done a blend before with Distress Oxide, so I'm really excited for that. So to start, I've cut out the cardstock, the Cape Cod cardstock, in the size that I need. And then I'm just going to pull out some of those rectangle borders. I think that the size here is the one that I'm going to use. That gives me a little bit of an edge after I pop out that border. So I'm going to use the inverted part of this. I want to create a picture frame. Instead of creating the positive shape, I'm going to keep that for another project and use this to create a window for my card. So I'm just going to stick this down with some Post-it tape and run it through my Sizzix Big Shot machine. And so here it is all popped out. And again, I'm going to save that other piece for another project because it's perfect. And so as a little cheat, now that I have that centered and cut out, I'm going to use that first piece as a template. So I've lined up my next piece to go underneath. And then I'm going to hold down my die and tape it to that second piece that's underneath. And then slide out the first one that's already popped. So I have to bend the paper just a little bit, fold it over the top of that edge of the die, and then I can just spin it and pull it right out of there. And now that die is perfectly in place, and I did all 4 that way. So now I'm going to use those ocean wave borders, and those are these die cuts you see here, or those dies that are laid down on my card. Now I like to invert them and use them as clouds for summer pictures, as well as you can use them as oceans. So they're really versatile. I like this die set, and I use this quite a bit in that way. So I'm just marking out some scrap paper so that I can cut out some cardstock to do the blending on each level of the clouds that I want to make. So I want to really have some depth to this card and some layering. So I'm going to do 2 rows of clouds, and I want one to be a little bit higher than the other. And so I'm cutting these out of cardstock for blending. Normally I would use mixed media cardstock, but I believe for this I'm just going to use some Staples brand cardstock, which also works really nice for blending. It's just because I have so many layers, I don't want to use the mixed media because it's going to be really thick, and I want to make sure that it's going to fit in the envelope okay. So now I have these cut to fit the width of the card, and I can use the dies and pop out those little clouds. So they're at the approximate height that I want them to be at. And so I'm just going to Post-it tape those down, run them through my Sizzix machine real quick. And I'm going to do this ×4 and for each level of cloud. So now I have the other one ready, and I'm going to do that the same. And I've made sure that the back is big enough to fit underneath the frame. And it doesn't really matter if it's a perfect square because it won't be seen when it's all put together. So now I have my base card and all my little cloud layers cut out. And so just taking a look at those, and this is kind of how they're going to lay out in the card when it's finalized. And so I did a sample one here, and you can kind of see when the shadow hits the light of those cloud edges, how much room I'm approximately going to have in the scene with the different levels of clouds. So now I'm ready to do the ink blending on those clouds. I want them to stand out a little bit and add a little sky too. So I'm going to start with my background layer, and so this is the base of my sky. And so normally for sky you always want to start darker at the top and then work lighter towards the bottom, and that's where your sunrise comes up and where the background would be the lightest in the sky. So I'm just starting with the Worn Lipstick first, and the Worn Lipstick and Wilted Violet will be the only two colors that are present in my sky. I want that Worn Lipstick to be at the bottom part of my sky, and so I'm putting that sort of in the middle or down from the top edge of my background piece. And then I'll come in with the Wilted Violet next and just make that darker row across the top edge of my background. And so this will be the base background of my layered fairy card. So just doing the circles like normal if you use the regular distress inks. I find that these blend really nicely and they layered really nicely, but you would also, it's easier to have more of an opaque application. So with the distress inks, I found that you blend the colors and then you get a third color. If you take two colors, you take a blue and a yellow, you blend those together, of course you see green. With these ones, if I blended too much of the purple, then I seen more of the purple. It didn't create a new color as much with the two colors meeting. So I really had to be careful about how I was blending and making sure that everything was even and didn't look too far off on one side or too dark on one side. But overall, I found that the blends were really nice. They were super creamy to work with. And I thought that the end result was just so pretty. It just was a beautiful pastel blend and the colors were very even overall. So I really liked how this came out, and I would really like to get some more Distress Oxide inks and try some more blends. I really love these, and the thing I liked the most about these is these colors began very light, and when I was done, they still had that lightness. I find that with the Distress inks, the more I blend, the darker they get, and with these ones, they really kept their lightness about them, and so it kept that nice pastel colors, and that's really what I wanted for this card. So now I've set my Distress Oxide blending pieces aside to dry. I'm just going to let them cure for a while I work on my fairies, stamping them out and doing the Copic coloring. So because I'm coloring this with Copic markers, I'm going to use my Memento Tuxedo Black ink stamp pad, and that is really Copic friendly and dries really quickly, so it allows me to get to work pretty quick. I don't have to wait for the ink pad to dry when I put down the stamp or anything like that. So I'm going to stamp out all my fairies ×4 because I need 4 cards. Now, you may have seen me do this in other videos if you've seen me do other fairy card videos. I like to come in with a micron pen and just create a hairband for the fairies. I just feel that in this drawing there's a natural curve above the crown where her little hair bun comes up, and I can fit a hairband in there. And I like to do that because I like to take the color of the dress and also use that color in the hairband, and it just kind of distributes that color throughout the picture of the fairy, and I just find it's a nice balance, especially when I'm using a very bright color for the dress. Now, I've put my Copic coloring in a separate video. I just did a lot of coloring for this, and I didn't want to cut out parts or speed them up. And I always feel kind of like I'm cheating my video when I don't show my full coloring, because I know some people like to see that. I know I like to see that in other videos when I'm just taking a look at other people's techniques or studying or learning new things. So I do have a separate video showing the full coloring of these fairies, and I'll include all the colors below as well in the description. If you want to see that video, I'm going to link it in a card, and I will link it in the video description below, and I'll also link it at the end of the video. So if you just want to watch how the card's made and then follow up at the end with the Copic coloring for the fairies, that's fine too. Let me know what you think of that too. I just thought that it would be neat to separate the videos just because the Copic coloring took almost as long in the video as this card making portion took as a video. So I just didn't want to cut out too much of that process. So this is just showing kind of a sneak peek of the colors. So my niece's cheer team is red and blue. Those are their colors. And so I did want to make sure that all the fairies were represented with their colors. And then all of the cheer coaches are represented by the hair colors. So we have 2 blondes and 2 brunettes. And so I'm just using my dies and putting them down and popping this out in my Sizzix as well. So now I'm going to work on the sentiment. I want to do the embossing on that blue cardstock, and the white will really pop on that blue color. So I'm really excited about doing this with the embossing. So I have a scrap piece of paper laid down underneath, and I'm just going to prep the surface with some kitchen flour, just so things don't stick where I don't want them to when I put the embossing powder down. And then using the Versamark ink pad just to ink that up to create that sticky ink so that the embossing powder sticks to the sentiment. I'm just going to put this down at the base of the frame and then just sprinkling on some embossing powder. And then I'm going to shake that away and just tap the edge with my brush to get any stray kernels or little grains that didn't make it off the board. So now I've run these under my heat tool off camera. I have them all ready to go. They're all embossed and set. And so I'm ready to move on to the next part. Now I have all of my Distress Oxide ink blending dry and it's ready to put the card together. I can assemble it now. So you can kind of see at the bottom I did a sample of what it's going to look like. And I just love this coloring. I love how the white parts of the clouds stick up and pop up, and that background really highlights the edges of those clouds. So when I was doing the Distress Oxide ink blending, I kind of talked through that part when I did the clouds. But what I did was just put one layer of the pink and left the top part of the cloud white because clouds are white, and so I really wanted that edge to really pop when it layered against that colored background. And so for the second layer of clouds, I took my other color, the purple, and did the exact same thing. Just left the white part of the clouds at the top, at the scallops, nice and open, not colored, and just gradiated it down into that Distress Oxide ink color. So now I have everything taped down. I'm not using any foam tape because I do want to keep this kind of as flat as possible for this, just because there's so many layers already. And so this was a little bit challenging to put the frame down because the cardstock is a lightweight cardstock. And so it did have a tendency to kind of want to move on its own with that two-way tape applied, but I was able to get everything put down in place. So now it's time to start arranging the fairies. I want them floating around the clouds, above the clouds. I really like how the top right fairy is breaking the frame. It just kind of draws interest and pulls the card together so the frame doesn't feel too separate from the scene that's going on. It kind of leads your eye into what's happening from the outside of the frame. So I have those all kind of where I think I want them, and I'm just going to put them down with some two-way tape as well. And I have to say it is challenging working with an even number of fairies. It's nicer to work in odd numbers, especially with design and composition. But there are 4 coaches, and so I had to use 4 fairies to make the card relevant for this. So I'm just using my Jelly Roll pen. It's a glitter one, and so I'm just putting some red sparkle dust coming between and around the fairies, just kind of trailing around them. And then just using my Wink of Stella brush pen in clear glitter to touch up their wings and add a little fanciness there too. And so these are just the final embellishments, the final touches. And then I have that ready, and now I can attach it to my card base. So again, just using my tape roller, I'm just going to run around the edges and then a few lines down the middle of the card. And then making sure that I have the folded edge at the top of my artwork so I'm not putting it on upside down. That's my worst fear. And so I like to assemble the cards like this, keeping that folded edge against my desk because the top of my artwork hits the edge of my desk and the top of the folded card hits the edge of my desk, and that always lines up perfectly. And that's the only edge I can't trim down if it's crooked. And so I did have an uneven edge here, but I was able to trim it up because it's on a cut side and make that card very flush with the front part of the artwork. So this is a look at the final card. I'm really excited with how it turned out, and I love those Distress Oxide blends. I'll definitely be doing that again. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you're notified the next time I post another video. And if you want to see that Copic coloring, I'll post it here too, so you can click the link and watch that. Thanks so much for watching.